My name is Greta Schultz. My capstone is called Who's Using All the Power? And I was exploring data center sustainability in Illinois. I knew going into this program that I wanted to do something where climate science and policy really couldn't be separated from one another. And so data centers turned out to be a perfect case study for just that. It's an industry that's quickly reshaping our energy system and our climate at the same time and doing it largely out of public view. Now, the public conversation around data centers tends to go one of two ways. Either they're framed as an economic success or an environmental disaster. And I didn't find either of these very helpful. So what I set out to do was more like a myth-busting exercise. Take a look at the concerns, look at them against the evidence, and then be honest about where the data supports alarm and where it doesn't. The driving question behind everything for me was, is Illinois prepared to manage this growth? And if not, what would it take to get there? So what actually is a data center? At its core, it's the physical backbone of the digital world. These facilities run 24/7, 365 days a year, and never turn off. The largest ones are called hyperscale campuses, and these can draw hundreds of megawatts of power, which is comparable to a small city. This is a picture that I took in Volo, Illinois, of Teresa Technology Parks, and it's a hyperscale facility built for hyperscale AI workloads. And just seeing the sheer size of it in person really put it into scale for me. So why is this happening in Illinois? Well, there are four main reasons. The first is nuclear power. Illinois generates more nuclear than any other state. It's about 53% of its electricity. That's reliable, low carbon, around-the-clock power, which is exactly what data centers need to operate. The second is fiber infrastructure. Chicago is one of the best connected cities in the Midwest. The third is land availability. There are large amounts of open land already near existing transmission. And then the fourth is policy. Illinois' commitment to 100% carbon-free electricity by 2045 is very attractive to companies with clean energy targets. So basically, Illinois checked every box and the industry noticed. So Illinois has been booming. As of early this year, Illinois has 108 operational data centers. 24 are under construction and 51 are in the planning stages. So this is a map that I made, and it focuses on just 25 key facilities in northern Illinois. The dots are the data centers, and they are sized by their significance and colored by their operational status. The lines are the high voltage transmission infrastructure, and the background shading shows two different regional power grids in the state, PJM and MISO. So when we zoom into Illinois, into Chicago area, you can see the pattern pretty quickly, that these facilities cluster around the city center and then fan out to O'Hare and the surrounding suburbs. And this isn't random. The grid really shapes where they can and can't be built. So all of that growth is putting a tremendous amount of pressure on the grid. By 2029, capacity shortfalls are projected to reach northern Illinois, and then will hit the southern part of the state by 2031. By 2035, data centers will go from 3% to 13% of Illinois' total electricity load. And then by 2040, a projected 30% increase in statewide demand. A big part of what's driving this is AI. US data center capacity has roughly doubled over the past decade, and it's projected to double again by just 2030. AI workloads are far more energy intensive than just regular cloud computing, so they're accelerating everything. So every major projection agrees that demand is growing faster than institutions are designed to manage it. And this isn't something you'll never see. It's already showing up in people's electricity bills. 70% of the $9.3 billion increase in PJM electricity costs in 2025 was driven by data center demand. Some ComEd and American customers said they saw triple-digit increases in their monthly bills that same year. So when we talk about data center growth as an economic opportunity, and it is, we also have to talk about who's paying for the infrastructure that makes that possible, because right now that cost is being passed off to ratepayers. Now I want to shift to part of the story that I think gets the least amount of attention, which is climate risk. These facilities will operate for 20 to 30 plus years in a climate that's going to look very different from the one that we have today. I've identified 4 primary stressors that will shape how Illinois' changing climate intersects with data center operations. The maps in this section were created in partnership with Monarch and Climate Weather Intelligence, who were part of my capstone advisory committee. So their data and mapping were a huge part of this analysis for projections specific to Illinois. So starting off with heat. Data centers generate massive amounts of heat through their constant computation, and their cooling systems rely on the surrounding environment to remove it. So as ambient temperatures rise, those systems work harder, draw more power, and get pushed towards failure at exactly the moment when demand is highest. And we've already seen this go wrong. In 2022, Twitter's Sacramento data center went completely offline during a heat wave. That same summer, Google and Oracle both went down in London when temperatures hit 104. These were facilities that were designed around historical temperature ranges that just no longer hold. So this map shows the mean annual days above 90 degrees with the data center locations overlaid. Chicago's on the lower end, but we don't read that as low risk. The urban heat island effect can still add several degrees above the regional baseline. Days above 95 degrees in northern Illinois are projected to jump from just 1 to 2 per year to as many as 10 to 60 by 2090. The second is flooding. Heavy rainfall events have increased by about 40% in Illinois, and Chicago's stormwater infrastructure was built for a very different climate. Most data centers are built with a lot of underground infrastructure, all of which are vulnerable to relatively shallow flooding. So this map shows extreme rainfall is actually more frequent in the southern part of the state, but frequency isn't the point. Even a small number of high-intensity events can overwhelm stormwater systems, and the areas most attractive for data center development typically have the oldest infrastructure and the least capacity to manage it. Now, the third and most important is drought and water stress. Large data centers can use up to 5 million gallons of water per day. In 2025, 86% of Illinois was in moderate drought, 43% was in severe drought, and multiple rivers hit no-flow conditions. Now, looking at this map, unlike the heat and precipitation, drought doesn't follow a clean north to south gradient. Northern Illinois shows the heaviest cumulative drought burden in the state, so that's 60 to 100 plus weeks of severe drought over the past 25 years. And this is exactly where a majority of the state's data centers are located. These facilities with the greatest water demand are in the part of the state with the most sustained drought pressure. And then lastly is extreme cold. Polar vortex events can freeze outdoor cooling towers, pipes, and backup generators that just aren't designed for sub-zero temperatures. During the 2019 polar vortex event, MISO issued a maximum generation alert, and Illinois saw widespread grid stress. Winter Storm Fern this past winter in January pushed PJM demand above 130,000 megawatts for 7 straight days, which broke a record. The DOE issued an emergency order to curtail the large loads, including data centers. And switching to backup diesel isn't smooth. If everything kicks in at the same time, it can spike demand as opposed to reducing the strain. So across all 4 sectors, the main idea is the same, that these are long-lived facilities that are being built into a climate that's already changing. Now, water deserves its own moment. This chart I made compares the daily water use for 500 acres of irrigated corn, which uses about 1.5 million gallons of water a day, compared to a city of about 30,000 residents, which uses 3, and then a hyperscale data center at peak cooling can use up to 5 million gallons of water a day. So the point here isn't precision as much as it is context. Data centers sit right alongside the kinds of users that water systems were historically designed around. This picture, again, was from Volo, Illinois, of a water tower sitting right next to the data center. That water comes from the same systems that everyone else is depending upon. So what is the industry doing about this? They're doing some things, but it's not nearly enough. The largest facilities are operating efficiently. They have renewable energy credits that are being widely adopted. There are liquid cooling pilots and reclaimed water experiments happening. But efficiency gains are being outpaced by demand growth. Buying just a year's worth of renewable credits isn't the same as running on clean energy in real time. In a sector that's scaling this fast, voluntary measures just aren't enough. So how did Illinois get here? Essentially, the state attracted this industry without ever building a framework to manage it. Back in 2019, a data center investment program created major tax incentives. And over the past 5 years, that meant $983 million in tax revenue. So it worked as intended. But by 2025, capacity auction prices hit records and electricity bills spiked. So in February of this year, Governor Pritzker proposed a pause on these new incentives. In that same month, the Power Act was introduced, and it's described as one of the most ambitious data center bills in the country. And it's a real step forward, but it's certainly reactive. Illinois is still trying to catch up while the industry keeps on building. So the underlying structural problem is what I frame as a principal agent problem, drawing on Hewitt and McCubbins. So here I frame Illinois as the principal. It sets the rules, they issue the permits, and it's accountable to ratepayers and their community. Data centers are the agents. They control the real load forecasts, the actual water consumption, and the cooling system choices. And they're incentivized by speed and cost, not so much as public interest. So Hewitt and McCubbins are clear when they say the agency loss is worst when agents hold private information, have different incentives, and face limited accountability. So all 3 apply here. and that's the core problem that my 4 recommendations are designed to address. The first is to require full environmental review for data center siting. The Illinois Environmental Protection Act already covers large industrial facilities, and data centers have largely avoided it. So my recommendation is simple: just apply what already exists. Hyperscale projects should go through the same permitting for air emissions, water withdrawals, and grid impacts, with load forecasts reviewed jointly by the Illinois EPA and the Illinois Commerce Commissions, because decisions today will lock in the risk for decades. The second is to make grid and rate impacts visible through the Illinois Commerce Commission. The ICC has the authority, it just hasn't applied it to data centers yet. A formal proceeding on how large loads affects costs and how those costs are distributed would give the ratepayers the transparency that they don't have right now. People are paying higher bills without any way to understand why. The third is binding community agreements for high impact siting. The Power Act already includes environmental justice provisions, and it's a real step, but provisions only work with real oversight behind them. So drawing on Ostrom's Commons governance framework, I'm recommending standardized, legally binding community benefit agreements that are publicly disclosed and measurable. And then lastly, use the leverage that Illinois already has. The state hosts some of the largest hyperscalers in the world, and it isn't using that position to the fullest. So I'm recommending that the Illinois Commerce Commission engage directly with the major operators, not just regulate reactively. Illinois can set the standard for what responsible data center governance looks like at a scale. It has the policy infrastructure, it just needs the political will. And this isn't specific to Illinois. Every question you ask AI, every email you send, or every video that you stream, a data center somewhere is running to make that happen. That infrastructure sits on our lands, draws from our aquifers, and connects to the grid. The question of how we power that future, who pays, who bears the environmental costs, and whether communities have a real say is not a technical question, but a deeply human one. Illinois is at an inflection point, and the decisions being made right now about permitting, grid planning, and community oversight will shape this industry for decades. So I hope this research contributes something useful to those conversations. And I want to thank the people who made this possible. So to my capstone committee, Corey, David, and Deborah, they all helped with the policy side to make sure that I'm not just being a scientist and thinking about how this would go out into reality. And then to the Monarch team, Crystal, Kevin, hi, and then Evan and Catherine, who are online. Thank you all for the climate side of this project and bringing my research to life with the visuals. And then to Jada and the rest of the CSP team and my cohort. So thank you all.
Greta, thank you so much for your amazing presentation. It was so great to watch. I have a question based on your findings. Was there any communities in terms of like environmental justice risks that stood out to you based on like water or extreme heat, et cetera?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know the Power Act that's going to be hopefully passed in November if it gets voted in definitely has environmental justice considerations in place, and they're proposing that data centers can't be built within, I believe it's 3 miles of an environmental justice community, which would be really good if that gets pushed into place. But as of right now, I know there's certainly air emissions that are affecting affecting disproportionate communities, specifically the diesel backup generators. When those get turned on during like high amounts of grid stress, those are certainly creating a lot of emissions like PM 2.5 and whatnot. So that's kind of the biggest from what I've seen. And then I know there's a lot of talk about water and how if you're draining all the water from the aquifers, it can leave a lot of the sediment and iron left in the water and kind of affecting our water sources. So there's a lot of public outrage about our public resources being tampered with.